Welcome back to a very special in-person episode of the City Journal podcast. I'm your host, Charles Fain Lehman, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and senior editor of City Journal. Joining me today on this all-New Yorker in New York panel are my colleagues Nicole Gelinas of Manhattan, John Ketcham of Queens, and Rafael Mangual of Long Island. I got that all right? Yeah, I got the geography correct.
I give you some.
That's true. That's true. He's originally from Brooklyn. Yeah, so we got three boroughs here.
We're all New York.
Do we have any colleagues from Staten Island? We need Staten Island representation at the Manhattan Institute.
We used to have some. Shout out Isaac Gordetsky.
Might just pervade the institute.
I love Staten Island. It's America's most urban, deep red county, and I respect them for that. I want to take us right into the news of the day. President Donald Trump ordered the National Guard deployed in Los Angeles after anti-ICE protests turned into violence, rioting, things burning, the usual. The protests, in turn, come after an increase in immigration enforcement in California. Democrats are charging ICE and Trump with provoking the protests. Meanwhile, Republicans are saying this is yet another example of democratic lawlessness. So I'm going to throw it to the whole panel. What do we make of these events? What's going on in Los Angeles?
It's not Trump who provoked the protests. It's people like Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom who made these spectacular statements using, all kinds of apocalyptic language, saying that, hey, this is a terror campaign and this is, sowing chaos and they're tearing families apart. That's what prompts people to get angry enough to, turn out in large numbers and wave foreign flags and set cars on fire and hurl, large rocks at police cars passing from overpass. Like it's infuriating. The idea, it is this sort of ongoing campaign of gaslighting that the Democrats really mastered in this kind of post-Ferguson era to deal with those protests. And I don't think people are buying it anymore, and I think that's a good thing. But it is still just no less infuriating when they try to sort of rearrange reality for you before your own eyes.
Oh, you can see where the left is, coming from their point of view. President Trump has consistently tried to push the envelope, especially when it comes to immigration matters, right? Kilmar Garcia being one of the examples, right? And so when you have images of Secretary Noem at CCOT in El Salvador, I think that does raise genuine fear among some people in some communities. I mean, maybe not everybody shares it. Maybe it's unreasonable, but those are the images that get presented to some people. And I just wish that the way immigration enforcement had been carried out from the beginning were a little different.
Sure.
I wish that, for example, the Helmsley building right next to our office were full of immigration courts and judges carrying out the orderly administration of justice and showing everyone that, yes, immigration enforcement is being handled in an orderly, appropriate, and serious way. But we didn't really get that. And so I think you are seeing some of the ramifications.
It's a fair point, but I don't think that the Trump administration would have gotten any credit had they done it that way.
Fair,
Okay?
absolutely. I agree.
This is all based on who is doing it, right? We didn't hear a peep out of the far left of the Democrats. Certainly nothing close to what we're seeing now when Barack Obama was deporting way more people on a regular basis, when people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden on campaign trails would say things like, if you want to stay in this country, we'll give you a path to citizenship, but you got to get to the back of the line and learn English. And I mean, that sounds like something Donald Trump might say, and nobody said a word about it. So to me, this is really driven by the fact that it's Donald Trump doing it. They hate him. They won't give him any credit, despite the fact that the immigration enforcement campaign is the one thing that he's doing that's incredibly popular. It's the reason that he was elected. Nothing about what he's done in LA is surprising. It shouldn't take anyone by surprise. I mean, he said he was going to do it. This is what he ran on. This is why he was elected. And frankly, when I think regular Americans turn on the news and they see a sea of Mexican flags being waved and, a large group of people where, whose faces are lit up by fires that were set to cars, I think that only builds support for that kind of agenda. So, ultimately, I think this backfires on them.
I'm going to just quick
Some of this goes back to who controls the narrative of the summer of 2020, where you had rioting in Minneapolis, you had rioting in New York City, you had rioting in Seattle and Portland and other major urban areas. And we had the Democratic narrative saying this happened on Trump's watch, even though states are clearly responsible for maintaining their own order. So where does the political blaming Governor Newsom stop and blaming President Trump for not maintaining order begin? Because you had the Democrats want it both ways, that all of this rioting in 2020 was Trump's fault if it existed at all, but if he were to attempt to maintain order, that would be unconstitutional. Now, I agree with John, I think it would be better not to start from here. You don't want the National Guard deployed unless the governor asked for it. Has this risen to that level? Probably not. If you look back to Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago, it was the governor of Louisiana who specifically asked President Bush to deploy the National Guard. 50,000 troops deployed, the biggest peacetime deployment of the National Guard on U.S. soil. But that was another instance where it got so out of control, it would have been better to do it earlier,
Right.
before the governor had asked for it. So where is that line where the president can ignore the governor and send the National Guard in? Maybe not here, but all of these things have to be considered when thinking about who is being blamed, how far do you let it get out of control, and so forth.
Okay, so we live in a very polarized country.
Sure.
We can recognize that Donald Trump will probably not get credit where credit would be due in certain circumstances, but doing the right thing in terms of institutional stability, in terms of the rule of law, is something that he should pursue anyway.
100%.
And there's no justification for the type of civil unrest, the burning of vehicles, the violence against law enforcement that we saw. There's just no excuse or justification for that. But we do have to wonder what might have been if a more measured approach from the beginning were taken, but that one that still has a great deal of seriousness.
I mean, I think the administration's position, which I find persuasive, is they have a mandate more than anything else, right? They had essentially two electoral mandates. One was to get immigration under control, and the other was to do with the price level. They've done okay on the latter, up and down, but on the former, like that's the thing, as Ralph alludes to, is their greatest popular mandate, and so I think their argument is like, and I've argued, Dan Martino and I had a piece about this, saying what they need to do is scale up resources. There's a section in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act trying to fund more of this. We'll see if it gets through. At the same time, I think the argument is like, we have a mandate to do this. We're going to do this by whatever means are available to us within the sort of broad constraints of law. The other thing that I would say that I think is important here is like the administration's done a very good job picking its enemies. This is the question. To me, this is like how deliberate are they being about this? Like I think about Kilmar Garcia, the guy that we talked about on the show before, who they accidentally deported to El Salvador, and then it turned out they're bringing him back for human trafficking charges. He's been indicted by a grand jury. He beats his wife. And this is like the people that people were jumping to defend. Ditto these protesters where, uh, I don't have strong misgivings about deploying ICE officials to do immigration raids in California, but like even if I did, I would still rather politically be on that side than on the sides of the people who are burning cars. And I think that the administration comes out stronger because they are positioned against that population.
Well, we still haven't settled on a definition of what is a peaceful protest. Is setting a Waymo on fire peaceful? If half
Mostly
of
peaceful.
the political leadership of the country would not term that a riot, that causes issues of when would they step in to stop this, and they did not step in to stop it in 2020. And we had, I was in Manhattan all summer 2020, never left. It was clearly rioting, massive property destruction all throughout Midtown and Lower Manhattan. But yet the narrative was, this is protesting. It is not rioting. So
They know the difference. The reason that they're failing to draw the line is because it's politically inconvenient for them to draw it where everybody in the world knows it is, right? No one thinks that setting someone else's car on fire is peaceful protest. No one thinks that that's okay, right? The only question here is that if it's our side doing it, we're going to really drag our feet to condemn it because it makes us look bad. And you see that in some of the responses, on X today. I mean, Governor Newsom, Angelinos, please don't riot. It just, you're falling into the trap. No, don't riot because rioting's bad.
Yeah.
Don't riot because you shouldn't set things on fire, not because it gives the other side, some kind of credit. Alex, I can never pronounce his last name. The guy from Cato who's like the open borders guy.
Oh, no, Rasta, Alistair
Yeah,
Rasta.
posted on X this morning or last night. I can't remember. Same thing. Like, they want chaos. You're giving them what they want. This is only going to increase support. It's like, no, this is bad because it's bad. It's objectively bad. The only reason that they are, kind of dragging their feet here is because they don't want to admit that it's their side doing it because they realize that they have a real political problem with violence. That's part of the Democrats' identity. I've been saying it on the show for a long time, and it's hard for them to walk away from it. You have the summer of 2020. You have all of the stuff that's happened since October 7th, the shooting of 2 Israeli, embassy employees. You have the guys set on fire out in Colorado. That was a peaceful protest. And who made it unpeaceful? The guy with the Molotov cocktails, obviously, right? You have what's been going on college campuses. There is just a sort of never-ending series of violence following left-wing causes wherever they go, and people are noticing.
See, my worry is that this is emblematic of deeper political failures, right? And I worry about the institutional failures and the instability that breaking customs and norms causes. And, we seem to be accelerating in that regard, both in terms of the willingness to break laws and to, engage in these riotous acts, but also to, meet that with a robust response. And in this case, it remains to be seen whether the president will invoke the Insurrection Act, for example. But if that happens, that's a major escalation. I would hope that it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking I'm going to take us out after this because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for our second topic. But I've been thinking a lot about late City Journal contributor Fred Siegel's Constant to the Riot ideology, which he wrote about both for CJ and elsewhere, which is, in the 1960s, leading liberal political figures responded to the riots of the late 60s by saying, this is downstream of legitimate concerns about structural racism. This is about, lack of access. This is about poverty. And you see similar language. Well, this is really a legitimate response or a predictable response to what the administration is doing. And Siegel's point was like, what you are doing, this is a classic, like, neoconservative insight. What you are doing when you make those arguments is creating an incentive. You're saying, we are willing to affect political change in response to these riots, which is a great reason to do more rioting. I think somebody said I forget who made this argument, at the start of Trump 2, we've seen much less popular protest. And the argument was like, well, we're just going to see much more direct violent action because it's like the protests don't seem to work. A majority of the public, at least then, was on his side, remains on his side on certain issues. We got to do something more drastic to try and affect our political goals. And I think it's sort of what we're seeing. That, hopefully, is a good segue into our exit, which is, I want to ask everybody, I was just talking to Brian Anderson, the chief of City Journal, and he said we should make sure we're doing a lot of coverage on this and related topics because he thinks it's just going to get worse over the course of the summer. So do people think this is going to be another summer of 2020? Are you worried about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you about continued rioting over the next couple of months? I'll throw it to Nicole first.
One thing that the summer of 2020 taught me was how quickly things can change and get out of control and escalate. I mean, I remember sitting in the backyard and it's like there's helicopters and they're boarding up the windows, and it's kind of like, well, yesterday we would not have thought that this could happen, and today it is happening and seems normal. So I am much more wary than I would have been 5 years ago that right now things seem fine, the city seems under control, things are going well, but that can change very quickly. And do we have city and state leadership in place to recognize when that is changing and to step in before it gets out of control?
Right. I also fear the tit for tat escalation here, and that is just going to be even more destabilizing for the country. I agree with Nicole. I had been here in New York City throughout the entirety of the 2020 the summer. The fireworks that were going off, the riots in the streets, it was just real mayhem. And it's something I think, as Americans should come together as and say, this is just not acceptable. We do have a political mechanism to adjudicate our differences, and we should respect that.
Yeah, look, I think the lesson of 2020 was that we created a permission structure for this kind of violent behavior. If you look at just the year after George Floyd was killed, there was something like 130 criminal justice reforms enacted across like 40 states in a very short period of time, all following, months of riots. What that told the left, I think, was that this is a way for you to get what you want. And if that was a lesson that they drew from that, then I do think that we'll see more of this. What's different here is that this is a federal issue, immigration, right? So I'm not sure that we're going to see a ton more protests on this because what are they going to get out of it, right? The Trump administration is not going to give them a win. At least I don't think so. So, if the question is restricted to immigration, I don't think we're going to see a ton of these. But I do think that the left has sort of very problematically embraced violence as a means to an end.
Yeah, I mean, I think this gets to sort of the core question for me that decides this, which is like, can the sort of center left walk the walk in addition to the sort of moderating talking that it has done thus far? We've talked about big city figures, Daniel Lurie, Andrew Cuomo, Eric Adams. Will segue into the New York City mayoralty in a second. Gavin Newsom, 2028 hopefuls who want to run away from defund the police and run away from the summer of 2020 and also want to run away from Donald Trump. And the question is, like, can they walk that tightrope? And the only way to do that is to be dispositively in favor of law and order in such a way that Trump can't sort of take advantage of the situation for his own political purposes. It's like if Gavin Newsom was focused on fully suppressing the violence in LA, if the LAPD and LA civilian leadership were putting out press releases being like, this was mostly peaceful protest, it's fine, then Donald Trump would have no opening. And like, can they resist the urge to fight with him over dealing with the actual riots in their streets is the core question to me.
Yes, I mean, Trump is always a response to Democratic failure. We saw that in 2016. We've seen it's been 10 years, but yet they never learn the lesson that you neutralize Trump by just being competent.
Yeah.
Can Gavin Newsom competently control his own rioters? If he can, that neutralizes Trump's role here.
I think the answer is no because he needs them.
All right. I want to take advantage of, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for talking about the next topic. So we'll go from local leaders to local leaders. Listeners know that we're very invested in the outcome of the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. We're all have been following with interest. Last week, the first mayoral debate happened. The next one is this week. We're in between. Last week we saw 9 people on stage. This week it's supposed to be 7. One of the 2 who's been excluded from the debate, Jessica Ramos, just shockingly endorsed Andrew Cuomo after spending like a decade decrying him as Satan. So what were people's impressions of the mayoral debate? Where are we in the race? And I wanted to make sure we hit this in this, very special New York episode, but I'll throw it to the panel.
It's depressing. It's depressing, right? This is the best that the best city in the world can do, right? And especially coming off of 2020 and all of the things that the city has experienced in the way of population loss and crime increases and disorder increases. And people like Zohran Mamdani are skyrocketing in the poll.
Friend of the pod.
Right. And it was empty. It was
But why do you
performed.
think Mamdani is rising?
Because I think he's run an incredibly effective campaign that creates the impression that he is popular and that his ideas are popular. right? I mean, just look at his social media feed. He has, hundreds, if not thousands, of followers who are just religiously reposting and making sure that every one of his videos and posts is, optimally ratioed and, and just well done. And the aesthetic is there. And I think it creates the impression that, hey, this is New York. He's a young guy and he's got, a t-shirt with a blazer on and he's cool and blah, 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 right? Right. But it's like, he's actually dangerous. I mean, his ideas are dangerous. The sort of people that he associates with are dangerous. His followers are exactly the kind of people that would set cars on fire and that have shut down Grand Central Station. And then you see someone like, like Whitney Tilson, for example, who sits there and makes sense and says things that are both vanilla, but also like, speak to core competencies of local government. And he's what, like at 1%? Like, awesome. Like
The $1 million question is, where is Zoran Mamdani's ceiling? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the conventional wisdom from several months ago would have said maybe 20%, 25%. Clearly, he's got some higher upside there. And it's because he's got, as Ralph says, this very well-calibrated machine, many, many door knockers. They are canvassing as many Democrats as they can. And, basically, he's able to mobilize better than all the others, I think, including Andrew Cuomo, on the ground game.
Yeah.
Now, where Jessica Ramos's endorsement of Cuomo is very important, I took that as being more important than AOC's endorsement of Mamdani.
Interesting.
And why? Well, because Ramos was the only Hispanic in the race, so she brings some Hispanic votes to Cuomo. She has a lot of credibility and support with labor unions. Right? She's a champion of unions and will allow the unions that backed her to go with Cuomo and buck the Working Families Party. Right? And so basically it provides a shield for them, allowing them to go to the more moderate candidate. And then she does have a bit of a ground game because, on the more progressive side, I think that she will bring some of her supporters and volunteers to go and help Andrew Cuomo. So whereas by contrast, the AOC endorsement is, anyone who really loves AOC is going to be voting for Mamdani anyway and ranking Mamdani first.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting too that we saw in the debate, that it's a strange election and that the incumbent is waiting until the general election, but candidates can run against Cuomo as the incumbent, and it leaves him vulnerable in more than just all of the baggage that he brings with the sexual harassment allegations and the nursing homes and the whole litany of things that people already know about. So, Cuomo's ceiling is how many people dislike him, but that is compounded by the fact that if you're just vaguely unhappy and you don't know why you're unhappy, Mamdani, as the emerging leading opponent here, can say, if you are unhappy, it is this guy's fault, and point to Cuomo correctly or incorrectly. So he faces the vulnerability of being an incumbent, even though he's been out of office for 4 years. And because of that, Cuomo benefits from low turnout. Mamdani benefits from a massive get out to vote operation where all of these enthusiastic people that registered to vote against Trump, do they come out or not? If they do, that's bad for Cuomo. If they don't, and you just get your union members and your older homeowner voters and, your super prime voters who vote in every election in a low turnout race, that benefits Cuomo. But after all of this, and we go through June 24th, we basically have the same race over again, which is very strange.
Yeah.
You just lose all the little candidates like Tilson who aren't getting any attention anyway. You're still in the general election. You still have Cuomo, Mamdani.
You think Mamdani's going to run?
He has the Working Families Party.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a rerun of the Cuomo versus Mamdani race, but with Adams as a wild card in the mix for November,
which has not happened in a multi-way general election that's competitive since 1969.
Yeah.
This
is Trump was reelect, right?
Yeah.
The liberal line.
Yeah.
This is why I don't think Mamdani's ceiling in the primary is all that important, because for the first time in my living memory, this race is really going to come down to the general, right? I mean, in New York, we're so used to the race kind of being decided by the outcome of the Democratic primary because in the city that's blue, the Republican almost never wins, right?
We should just note that New York City is a closed primary
right.
system. So in order to participate in the Democratic primary, you have to be a registered Democrat.
Right.
And most of the time, that means that the winner of that Democratic primary goes on to an easy general election win, given the overwhelming registration advantage that Democrats have.
Right. But, even if Mamdani loses the primary, he still runs under the Working Families Party. He'll have name recognition by that point. And so his ceiling, it's less important in isolation, and it becomes important with respect to the potential floors of the other likely three candidates that are going to be in the race competing for the same vote.
You do the math. You do the math. If Mamdani's getting 45%, that's the poll in front of him, is getting 45% of Democrats. Democrats are about 2/3 of the city. Rounding error, you say Mamdani gets 30% in the general. That leaves 70%. Something like 20% will vote for Curtis Sliwa, so that leaves 50. And if half of that 50 goes each to Cuomo and to Adams, then Mamdani wins. So I think there is a path there, which is alarming to me.
Well, the primary is ranked choice, but the general election is not.
Right.
And so you do have the ability for vote splitting and a plurality winner in the general election.
Right.
So to Charles's point.
That is my concern. Was there anyone else? I mean, this may be a non-starter question, but was there anyone else who stuck out in the Democratic in the primary debate? I thought there were a couple of people who were. I mean, nobody's perfect. I'm curious what people make of the other candidates. Tilson was great.
I thought he was great.
Whitney Tilson, who is really an MI Democrat, I guess.
Yeah, I thought he was great, and I thought everyone else on stage was just completely unimpressive. Even Mamdani, who has sort of built. I actually thought the debate was probably one of the worst moments of his campaign because it's such a sharp contrast between the character that we saw on stage and the character that's been promoted on social media that seems put together and quick on his feet. He was just.
He didn't bring the charisma.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually really interesting to see. I wonder if other voters, picked up on it. But yeah, I mean, the takeaway for me was the complete lack of anything impressive, and just in the way of things being said, of just presentation styles, charisma. New Yorkers deserve better.
The structural difficulty is Cuomo is really vulnerable from the center and being the architect of the move toward criminal justice leniency between 2017 and 2019.
Which he doesn't want to sound.
But he doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, someone asked him about it at the debate, and he spent that time criticizing Brad Lander's wife. And he did that on purpose because he was deflecting the question.
Right.
But no one consistently on the stage criticizes Cuomo from the center because they've come up in their careers in low turnout, low attention elections, so they can pander to the left and not get a lot of attention for that. It's hard for them to walk back that once they're in a higher attention, broader race. And ironically, Cuomo, he's not embarrassed to just completely do a U-turn on what he did and said before, because he just sort of has that chutzpah to go out and do that. He's beating them just on sheer force of personality.
Yeah. We were discussing this a few days ago. Andrew Cuomo is almost like the embodiment of all of humanity's contradictions. Where all of us are in some way a tangle of contradictions, and adept politicians can capitalize on that to remake themselves at will. Donald Trump does this pretty well too.
Compulsive liar.
You can different angles on the thing. Yeah. But I found it interesting that very few candidates, really except Whitney, criticized Mamdani.
Yeah.
And this is a dynamic, I think, brought about by ranked choice voting, because they're afraid to have Mamdani voters not rank them somewhere. But to me, that's a bit misplaced, because if Mamdani is ranked first, which I believe he will be on the vast majority of his supporters, like anything ranked under him is just never going to count, because Mamdani will wind up in the last round.
Right.
So for someone like Brad Lander or Scott Stringer, I would think the approach is tell Mamdani voters, me before Mamdani. right? And try to rack up as much, first ranks as possible. I don't know, whether that's going to be viable, but at the same time, it seems to me a more plausible winning strategy than to simply avoid attacking Mamdani and thereby facilitate his rise indirectly.
And how much do people's contradictions show up on their ballots? I mean, it's very unpredictable. Like, how many people who rank Mamdani also rank Cuomo fifth?
But there will be some of those,
So
right?
how does that all work out?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
This is like the Trump I think the posted coverage of somebody who's a Trump AOC voter who's now a Trump Mamdani voter.
Oh yeah, I did see
Yes,
that piece.
yeah.
That was strange.
Similar population.
There are a lot of low turnout, low information voters,
Yeah.
and
Clearly, right?
yeah. I mean, it's just hard. And in Democratic primary, you don't see any other information about the candidates on the ballot, right? So if you don't do your homework, and many voters do not do their homework, it's just the nature of the election. And just for context, when we say low turnout election, the last one in 21 was 26.5%. Right? And that was the first
Of
one
Democrats.
of Democrats,
eligible.
of eligible Democrats. There was the first one without an incumbent in a long time.
Yeah.
And it was the first one using ranked choice voting, too. So, we're not going to be.
Do you think it's going to be higher this time?
I think a bit. Probably
Because
not.
of Mamdani turnout effort.
Mamdani, and it is a really contentious race. It's chaotic in a way that the other one was, but we had COVID and other things. Yeah. But I wouldn't expect to break 30% though.
So let me take us out. We're talking about Jessica Ramos dropping out. I suspect that there's some kind of deal that happened there. We may see Ramos in a position of influence in a future Cuomo administration. Who knows? Great questions.
She's worked in a city hall before,
Right.
so I think we can assume she would want a labor negotiation or another major job in
But-
city hall.
But people are definitely, starting to do the political math of if I endorse, what happens. So here's my question: who's next, and who are they endorsing for? Who's the next person to drop out, or is it nobody?
Ranked choice voting disincentivizes dropouts, right? But I think what we're seeing is a recognition that ranked choice voting is really hard to coordinate. I know an abacus is a really powerful addition, device. I don't know how to use one, right? And so I really couldn't make much use. And so I think ranked choice voting is similar. It's very hard for candidates to coordinate support without making it look like an endorsement of the other guy. And it's very hard for voters to know enough about up to five candidates to make an informed choice.
It's especially true when our campaign finance board and board of elections continues to send out inaccurate mailings and so incompetent. They sent a little booklet to my house just this weekend, the same weekend that I got my absentee ballot, and the booklet incorrectly said Adams is in the Democratic primary.
Right.
That's just inexcusable. Because if I'm carefully making out my ballot and learning about these candidates, and I decide, oh yeah, I'm going to pick Adams, and I go in the voting booth and he's not there, what do I do? And
Right.
there will be people like that. I mean, you cannot send people incorrect information when you are already starting early voting.
Right.
I think if I had to make a prediction, it's going to be Adrienne Adams.
That was what I was thinking too.
Dropping out.
Is the Speaker of the City Council?
Yeah, and I think she might actually throw her weight behind Mamdani.
Yep. I think
Wow.
there's a real possibility.
Okay.
In terms of, because and this gets to the point of who was going after Cuomo. She was, I think, among the most aggressive anti-Cuomo partisans. She sure doesn't seem to like him. I think a lot of people in New York City politics don't like Andrew Cuomo, and there might be another star they could hitch their wagon to mix my metaphors.
So we go right from this debate to official early voting. So any dropouts and endorsements would have to happen very, very quickly.
Yeah. But I mean, the other question is Michael Blake, who was very aggressive on Cuomo in the election. He's not going to be on this. In the debate, he's not going to be on the stage either. I don't know where he ends up. He is going to continue to fight to be on the stage, I think he said, and he's not pulling a lot of votes, but could make some degree of difference. All right. Before we go, I'll ask one last question. Last night, as we're recording this, I think it was last night, was the 70th annual Tony Awards. celebrating the all things Broadway. So I'll ask our panelists, are you a musical fan? And if so, what are your favorite musicals? We'll start with Nicole.
There was this obscure musical like 10 years ago called If Then with Idina Menzel, who was famous, of course, from Wicked. And strangely, the main character, Idina Menzel, played an urban planner in sort of Bloomberg era New York City. It did very badly. It closed after like 6 weeks, but
You were the target audience.
I saw it twice. Yeah, so I would, if there's a video out there, I would recommend people go watch the video.
You know, Nicole, every New Yorker has a side hustle, right? I think we've got something going here, guys. Okay. I like Broadway. I go a couple of times a year. Last year, I saw Great Gatsby and Stereophonic. Stereophonic had won all these awards. I mean, the critics were raving about it, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, it's where are we going with this? And we get to the end, and I realize it's just a critics' play. Right, whereas Gatsby was much more of a crowd pleaser and something that I would have expected to be, Broadway.
I've only ever seen 3 musicals, 2 by force, 1 out of curiosity, which was Hamilton, which I kind of enjoyed, but I have no opinion. I just
You're not a musical guy. You're not a musical guy.
Opera's better.
Are you an opera guy?
I've been to the opera once. It was an interesting experience, but yeah, also not my thing. We saw
UFC, on the other hand.
play Mozart. I forget the name of it.
The Objection from the Seraglio,
No.
the Marriage of Figaro,
No,
Don Giovanni.
Don Giovanni. There you go.
He wasn't gonna stop until he figured it out.
No, it was Don Giovanni. Yeah.
Fair, okay.
Is that Mozart?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the second of the 3
Yeah.
written by De Ponte.
Okay.
Um,
I got that right.
yeah, yeah.
I was raised on classic musicals. My wife has been exposing my older son to earlier this month it was Your Good Man Charlie Brown, and now I think it's Cats. So she's just really getting him into the entire repertoire, and I've enjoyed revisiting those. I think she's going to take him to see a very small production of Your Good Man Charlie Brown, and that will be a great deal of fun. So I like musicals. I enjoy them on their merits. I'm not sure I want to pay Broadway prices, but with that, I believe that's about all the time that we have for this very special in-studio episode. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, as always, to our producer, Isabella Reggi. Listeners, watchers, if you've enjoyed this episode, or even if you haven't, please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell, do all the things, all the buttons, press every single button available to you right now on YouTube or other platforms. If you have questions, please leave them below. If you're on YouTube, or I don't know, you can break into my house and leave a question there. I'm not going to tell you where I live. You can guess.
Don't break into my house.
Don't break it. Yeah, don't break into my house.
You don't want to break it down.
Until next time, you've been listening to the City Journal podcast. We hope you'll join us again soon.